Hello, hello, welcome back, everybody. So today Xander is unwell, so he's not going to be with us. So we have a very special guest, Alison, here to join us with myself and Chrissy to talk about everyone's favorite topic, the topic that makes all B2B marketers quiver in their boots, the topic that creates more drama on LinkedIn than any topic I've ever seen, the topic that makes CMOs have short tenures. Finance teams get really upset. The topic is attribution, and we're going to dig into a lot of the things that people get wrong about attribution, the different types of attribution. One of the big things that a lot of companies and people in our space get confused about is funnel metrics and funnel attribution versus multi-touch attribution. So we're going to break that down and just go into all of the weeds here and try and tackle the differences between the attribution models, where people go wrong with the different data models and how to actually utilize them the right way, and then what questions that you can answer. So it's going to be a great episode. Every time we bring Alison on and we talk about this kind of stuff, it's our most popular episode. So I'm excited to dig into all of this. So I think where I want us to start is really setting the stage. So Alison, let's set the stage with the differences between the way that we think about funnel attribution and funnel metrics versus multi-touch attribution. So from like a high level, if you got on a call with a client and they're just like, help me understand this from a high level. Where do you start? Where do you go when you're trying to explain this?
Yeah, so I mean, the way that I think about the funnel is it's really about um, measuring your volume, velocity, conversion rate, the three V's, understanding um, what touch points are starting your sales journey or what is your tipping point, and then based on that, like what are your conversion rates? How long is it taking those leads to get through your sales process to pipeline to convert to close one, and then really using that data to optimize each stage of that funnel. Like, where are the bottlenecks occurring? Are the bottlenecks occurring, early on, you're not getting enough MQLs, or is your bottleneck happening later on? After that meeting that you had, you're not converting those to pipeline. Or is it even in the you know initial outreach that your sales team is doing? Are those messages not resonating and things are just falling off at that point? So really using that data to hone in on where your bottlenecks are and where things are dropping off, and then using that to optimize, and then using the data as a testing ground for once you've once you've made a change, are we seeing that in the data? So, like, if we decide, oh, we're going to change our sequences in outreach so that they resonate more, are we then seeing a better conversion rate post implementation of that optimization? And then conversely, on the multi-touch attribution side, that's really where you're looking at all of your touch points and what's working and what's not just the tipping point, and kind of measuring the effectiveness of those touch points in terms of, when we see someone engaging with this kind of content, we see a higher win rate, or when we see someone engaging with um, another type of content, are we seeing those deals close faster? And finding out what particular touch points are working and what's not, so that you can reallocate your budget or create more content that's similar, so that you see the results you want to see.
So one of the things that I always hear from people is around the funnel, on the funnel attribution side, is they don't like tying everything back to a single touch point. They're like, it's too simplistic. Um, but then, some of the things that I know that we've been thinking about internally around like tracking signals, and I'm trying to understand that the tipping point is really kind of the counter argument to that. So, Chrissy, you want to kind of break down some of that and kind of talk about, in particular, the criticism of a single touch model, but then why is tying it back? And I know, Alison, you've talked a lot about like the conversion rates through the stages, but like when you tie those conversion rates back to a single touch point? What is the benefits of that? What would you say to someone who's like, I only want to do multi-touch. I want to do, I only want to do multi-touch. I don't like this single touch stuff. What would you say
Yeah.
to them, Chrissy?
Um, So I think one thing is like if you are kind of well versed in the customer journey, like you said, there's a ton of touch points that happen along that journey, whether it's like pre-sales ready versus after that. And so I think, like we said, multi-touch attribution can lend to that because then you're getting insight into those individual things that can like lift or do some analysis where if you take away a touch point or anything like that, like what is the propensity still that opportunity closed one. But when I think about the attribution on the funnel data, like you said, I really think about kind of measuring what signal we're sending to sales, or that becomes sales ready. And in some ways those can also just align to your different go to market motions. So for us, when we have, say, like a more typical MQL comes in inbound, say they, converted on an ad, they filled out a demo request form, we're going to tie that person back to like paid search, Google, and then the demo request. So we can give that attribution down to the offer as well as like where they came from. But that's going to become now sales ready. And the salesperson needs to follow up with them and seeing the data of that person and even that source or offer, or even that's like more of a demand gen kind of inbound motion, being able to tie the funnel metrics down to that type of signal and also that type of sales ready uh, uh, journey. So like that, I would even look at, okay, if we look at our hand raisers, the people that came through demo requests, what is the conversion rate compared to say outbound? It's going to be different. So being able to slice that difference. And then alternatively, like I said, there's other cases where someone can become sales ready and start a funnel. That could even be a partner sends over an opportunity. We still backdate that data. They become sales ready and then opportunity and so forth. And then also for outbound. So being able to actually measure the effectiveness of the signals you're sending to sales or the type of even like go to market like motions in some ways, if you want to even dumb it down even more to that kind of thinking, is a great way to think about your funnel metrics. It's also a way to like draw a line in the sand because when we think about it, like, yes, I think the confusing part is we're talking about it like a funnel, but I think it's really more about a life cycle journey, like we talked about, or a sales journey. And that usually starts at when it's sales ready. And so tying it at that kind of last thing that they did to actually make them sales ready is a great kind of one touch to measure throughout. And it's very clear and concise. There's no like, oh, this should get credit. It's like, no, the whatever the thing that made themselves ready gets the credit. There's no like argument over that. And it gives you a better sense of the data. Multi-touch attribution, in my opinion, if you're trying to get insight into what are the offers or campaigns that are um, better at like driving people through the funnel. It's very much more like art, in my opinion, especially as it's getting harder to measure. In some ways, you want to look at your campaign, like the campaigns and tie the multi touch attribution. Sometimes you want to also then layer on self reported attribution to then get better details. And then in some ways, you might want to even add on like implied attribution. You did a billboard during Dreamforce, your website activity went up, your inbound conversions went up. You could maybe tie that back to your billboard during that time, and that's a way to do implied attribution. So getting insight into like what's working in general across all the touch points is much harder. It has a lot of nuance to it. You need someone who's very much embedded into like the go-to-market strategy and the marketing and the sales motions to make sense of all of that. And it's really to just improve. Like, should we do more of this? Should we actually do none of this? Because if those campaigns you're doing don't show up in the multi-touch attribution, that also means to me like don't do it. And that's a little bit easier. It's actually to make sense of it. Like, don't invest more in that. So to me, tracking the funnel and thinking about more of like what is the effectiveness of like what we're sending to sales as a signal is a much more telling and actionable type of data. Because also there's things you can do operationally. Okay, let's do less outbound, or we're sending leads to sales too quickly and we should only send them once they have done like a hand raiser event. These are all some decisions you can make off of that data from your funnel metrics and funnel attribution.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things I want to call out there. The first one is around kind of this concept of the signal that you're sending to sales. I think the really important thing I want people to take away from that is like, yes, we're thinking about it as we're attributing kind of it back to that single touch point that was the reason why they were sent to sales. But the reason why that's important is because sales should be crafting the right message at the right time based on the signal. So we want to learn, okay, if I send this signal to sales and they then respond with a certain message related to that signal, what are our conversion rates through the funnel? And then I can optimize both to what Alison said, maybe the sequence in outreach or sales lofter based on the signal, or we can start optimizing the signals that we're sending to sales. I think that is a really important part of this revenue generation machine that you're trying to create, to optimize based like what are we sending to sales, how are sales reacting, and then we can look at the conversion rate through the funnel. One of the downsides though, and you touched on it a bit, Chrissy, is like the credit game. Once you do tie everything back to one thing, everyone then starts using that attribution model as a way to assign credit on who's doing the best job, right? In terms of teams and stuff like that. So Alison, I know you've worked on so many of these projects for our clients, and we see all of these problems kind of play out in different ways around the credit game. And I know you've always had some great advice with, improve, not prove. But what's your latest thoughts around how you can not fall into the trap of the credit game while still getting the benefits out of a funnel attribution model, which is tying back to a single touch?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to the credit game, it's important to remember that in an ideal world, both sales and marketing should have a part in every successful closed won deal. So it's somewhat pointless to assign credit because sales touched it first, marketing touched it later. If marketing touched it first, sales touched it later. And so we're all part of the process of trying to win over customers. So yeah, I would first say that, and then in terms of the funnel metrics, like assigning a particular touch point to whether it was an outbound that started the journey or whether it was marketing that started the journey, it's more for using that data to then kind of optimize what you're doing rather than prove what you're doing. Because if, for instance, you're MQLing a bunch of, say content syndication leads and you're not seeing those convert, I mean, that's a signal to you to then, do we need to stop doing some of our content syndication? Or should we reallocate that budget towards, an in-person event or what we are seeing convert? And so that's really how you should be using that data. And then it is also helpful in terms of measuring attainment towards goals and seeing trends. Like, okay, we generated 100 MQLs last week, and 50 of those have converted. And this week we generated 200, and only 50 of those converted. So the conversion rate's dropping. So kind of using that data to then analyze what to stop doing, what to start doing. But yeah, I think overall, I mean, that's kind of why we think the credit game isn't necessarily worth playing, because it's a team sport.
Yeah, like I think that people need to think about this as like okay, this is like a relay race. It's not just like a 100-meter dash, like a 100-meter sprint, like who won the race. It's more just like
I would say it's
there's
more of a, when people tie one leg together and then they have to two people and
an
they have to
egg,
run.
an egg.
Three-legged race.
The three-legged race, yeah. You have like two people, they tie one leg together, and the sales and marketing have to run, right?
Yeah.
It's not always just one hand off to the other. You're actually like in partnership the whole way through.
I think I agree with that, like a three-leg race, like marketing and sales working together. But when you think about the funnel metrics, there are these explicit kind of handoffs or people that are kind of, kind of owning that stage a little bit more. Of course, there's like nuance to that. But when you think about even some of the like top and middle funnel, like if we're seeing that the conversion rate from sales ready, especially from different sources, are not converting well to say meetings, or they're getting disqualified or recycled, kind of like what Allison was talking about, there's actionable data for that team to do something about it. Whether we need to figure out like, okay, maybe it's a source thing where it's too early on the marketing side to send them over, or say we're measuring outbound and the conversion rate is really low. Okay, maybe marketing needs to actually partner with sales or SDRs to actually do outbound more effectively, or send them, give them better enablement and training or signals to actually do outbound the right way. And so I'm just a fan of like funnel metrics and funnel attribution because it's just so actionable. I think that's like we're all talking about.
Yeah.
Like you can see insights that you can actually make improvements from. You can give direction to different people that own those parts of the journey and the sales process. And even down to looking at, your pipeline to close, if you want to look at people from certain regions or even different sources and stuff like that, you can actually then get that back to marketing and say like, hey, we need to do more here, or we need to bring more people into the funnel from these regions, and we're not seeing that. So it's just so actionable. You can create better conversations around it. Multi-touch, in my opinion, you can have great conversations around it, but I feel like it's kind of like handing a novice like cook or something like that, someone who's never been in a kitchen, and you give them like a really sharp knife and like a sous vide or something, and then you're like, go make me like this amazing meal, and they're like, wait, I actually don't know what I'm meant to do with this thing, and they can like also hurt themselves or not do the right thing with
That's a good
those
analogy.
tools. So that's why I feel like, in my opinion, that is more of a go-to-market team needs to figure out like who's going to best like utilize that data.
Yeah.
I would
So
add, I was just gonna
uh,
say, I would add too that multi-touch attribution people often forget is more of a lagging indicator as well. So
Yes.
it takes time to really pull those insights. And
Mm-hmm.
whereas funnel metrics, you can see pretty much right away how your sales ready leads are converting and where those bottlenecks are, and it can be much more of a leading indicator, because yeah, the bottleneck may occur much more before it even hits pipeline, and kind of
Right.
understanding that. So
Yeah,
another
that's so
reason
true.
why, yeah.
And like you're so reliant on pipeline to be generated in revenue, where that, like you said, is a lagging indicator. And I think that's when we're talking about confusion on the difference, this is also where I've seen even like leadership get caught up. They go to their ops team, they're like, tell me how much pipeline we've generated from this event we did last week. It's like, whoa, that's like, it's so early. Like that pipeline is, like you mentioned, like more of a lagging indicator, and revenue, especially. I mean, of course, if you have a high transaction sale or something like that, there's exceptions to the rule. But for many SaaS companies, a touch point like that or a campaign, it's very rare that you're just gonna get like true pipeline out of that like so quickly.
Yeah, the other thing that I would kind of mention on what I would kind of consider the biases between the two different models is I always think about how the complaint with funnel attribution is that it's too much of a narrow focus. Like it's biasing towards one touch point. Whereas when I think of multi-touch, I think of it as like I kind of call it the everything works bias. Like you can kind of just prove that anything works with multi-touch, right? Because particularly if you're looking at all of the touch points under an account, right? You might have Microsoft as an account with 2,000 contacts under there. And it's like, well, that one email I sent to this one contact in Venezuela and they clicked it. And then there's like a 2 million opportunity with Microsoft in the States. And my email campaign now has influence on that opportunity. It's like, okay, is that really useful or not? So that's to Chrissy. I liked your analogy where it's very complicated, it's very nuanced. There's a lot of bias in it, and you have to really figure out ways to strip away the bias and use the data in the right way. Otherwise, you can just essentially prove that anything works. But moving on to another topic, so Alison, you've been our architect of what we call Project Insight. And if anyone hasn't heard of Project Insight, it's our unmanaged Salesforce package that you can use to track your funnel and lifecycle, ties all the data into one object, have unified data to be able to report on where are all of my leads and buyers coming from and becoming sales ready, how are they converting through the funnel, tying everything through to the opportunity, and giving you really good data to track multiple journeys, all that kind of stuff. We've done other videos on this, but I think there's a category here between these two different attribution models or the setups around the actual ability and how complex it is to execute and get the data, like the raw data. And I always think about kind of the funnel side. It's actually really hard to get the data in a really good place. Whereas the multi-touch attribution side, it's a bit easier, right? You just need to track all of the touch points. So Alison, I'd love you to kind of flesh out kind of your perspective there. Like, do you agree with me? I don't know, nothing's easy in what we do, but like if you had to compare the two different types, like which one's harder to get the data structured the right way, and maybe talk about some of the nuances around how you get the data structured the right way for each one.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree that it's much more challenging to get the kind of supporting architecture in place for a funnel than it is for multi-touch. Part of the reason the funnel is difficult is because it isn't linear, and because of course there are multiple touch points along the way. So how do you decide what gets, what is the tipping point for that journey? So there's that piece of it, is what do you decide is the tipping point? Like marketing, if marketing generated a lead from an ebook download 6 months ago, and that person hasn't done anything since then, but the salesperson starts reaching out, are we giving tipping point credit to the ebook from 6 months ago? Or are we saying this is outbound? And so making those kinds of decisions. And then another thing that people, it's seemingly simple, but can get complicated too, is like, let's say you are prospecting to a contact and, they're being unresponsive. So then you end up recycling that contact, but then for whatever reason, they finally do get back to you a couple days after you recycled them. Do you start a new life cycle, or do you just resume the one that closed out? And so it can get very complicated. And we help our Project Insight product does have the ability to kind of make that much more configurable, but there are a lot of complexity to those kinds of decisions and just nuances into how it's linear. Whereas, yeah, I mean, I feel like multi-touch is somewhat easier in that as long as you're capturing as many touch points as you can, and then you're tying, contacts to opportunities, or even if you're not, you can still do like an account-based model where you're able to tie touch points on contacts at the accounts to those opportunities. You can pretty easily calculate, which touch points were most effective relative to when they came in, relative to the opportunity create date. But yeah,
I think I have two things to add on to that too. So I think one thing why we feel like funnel metrics is more complex is literally around that, like the life cycle and the funnel, and like there's a lot of work that companies actually need to do to define it, and also, like you said, make sure that they're tracking the data the right way to account for all the ways that someone can become sales ready. And it's much easier to see when something's missing in your funnel metrics or your life, your life cycle metrics versus multi-touch attribution. You build a multi-touch attribution report, you're going off just what you're seeing is getting the credit. You may have campaigns that are not represented there. No one set them up. Maybe you're not even seeing like partner-led, opportunities from an event that they did or something like, but you don't see that really quickly by looking at the data, because just because it's not there, maybe you think it's just not there because it's not getting the credit, or maybe it's just not there because you actually aren't tracking it properly. Where on the funnel metric side, it's very clear when you're like, oh, hey, we actually have a ton more opportunities than kind of what I'm seeing as far as journeys, getting converted to pipeline, what's happening there. Oh, well, you're actually not tracking sales outbound journeys. You're not tracking partner journeys. You're not tracking PLG journeys that maybe are turning into a sales-led motion from a product-led motion. And that is the difference, I think, of where people have tackled their funnel lifecycle journey reporting, where they're thinking it as only starting as a typical MQL, which is what is being sent for marketing. And that is not the way to think about your data. That's not unified go-to-market data. That is literally a one motion or source data, and you're missing out on a ton of stuff. And there's no question and around like, or in my head, like, this is the 100% why marketing and sales are going to these meetings with their board, and sales is saying, hey, we're generating all this pipeline, and marketing is trying to make sense of the reporting that they have, and there's a different story around it. So I think that one, funnel metrics is hard because it's more defining the process around it, but also it's very clear when you're missing data. Or multi-touch attribution, you're probably missing data, but no one's actually seeing that because it's just, you might be thinking it's just not in the data. It shouldn't get credit. And so that is also why I think there is this perception of more complexity, but also in reality, there is more complexity.
There's definitely more complexity. The other thing I would add is that when you're thinking about the funnel side, calculating the conversion rates, particularly pre-opportunity, is where there's also a ton of complexity that isn't in multi-touch attribution. So like multi-touch attribution, if you think to what we've just been talking about here, you kind of just want to make sure you're tracking all the touch points, as many of them as you can, and then you just need like opportunities created, right? You don't even need contact roles at some point, because if you, like Alison said, if you're just bringing in all the touch points under the contacts under an account, that's not easy. Nothing's easy in what we do, but it's easier than trying to go, okay, well, we need to do all of that, but we actually also need to know, was this contact worked by sales? And how do you do that? Well, is there an activity? Is there an outreach or sales off stage that's been updated? How are we tracking those activities? There's lots of different types of activities. Which one do we track to say that they are being worked? And then it's like, okay, well, now there's a meeting. Now we need to progress to the next stage. How do we track the meeting? Is it a stage 0 opportunity? Is it
are you thinking an activity from the sales engagement platform? Or?
Yeah, and it's like, okay, well, let's have 2 months of debates around stage 0 opportunities. Side note, we like stage 0 opportunities. They pretty much, most of our clients, we advise to go that direction. It definitely helps. But there's a whole lot of complexity around that. And then it's like, how do you create the opportunity? Do you get the contact role on that opportunity? Are you creating the opportunity from the contact? And then all of that process, then you go, okay, humans, sales team, follow this process to a T, otherwise this whole shit breaks. And like, you can put guardrails in and try and get everyone to do everything the right way, but as everyone knows, sometimes the more guardrails you put in, the more sales then goes around the system, and then you've got opportunities living in a Google sheet, not even in Salesforce. So it's really hard. But like, for multi-touch attribution, like we said, get the opportunity data, get the attribution, get the touch point data, and you're good. But the thing that's kind of a little bit counterintuitive with this is that funnel, I always think of it as hard to execute, but easy to analyze.
Yeah.
Multi-touch attribution is easy to execute, but it's hard to analyze. So it's like, that's why we advise start with funnel, because you need to, and especially Alison actually really liked your point around the lagging versus leading indicator. Like funnel is going to give you actionable data in weeks, right? And you need to have a solid sales process. You need that go-to-market foundation. You need all of this stuff working. Plus, because for funnel attribution, you need to make sure you're tracking all the touch points as well, right? So now you're building the foundation that's going to help you on the multi-touch side. So that's why we always talk about kind of starting with the funnel side first, even though it's harder, and then move on to the multi-touch side. But maybe I'll open up to both of you. Do you have any other thoughts around that kind of ranked importance of where to start first and then where to move on? Is there any other nuance that you'd put into that category of where people should start if they have neither?
I do. I have one thing, and Alison probably has way better. But another thing for me is like multi-touch attribution, like we talked about, can have a lot of bias. So, okay, let's take an example. We talked about this a lot. I know Alison does too. You have your like most popular report that you do like every year. It has like a ton of people downloading it. It's, you're sending it to everyone. That's going to show up in your multi-touch attribution likely is like on pretty much most of your pipeline and revenue, which is why I think lift analysis is a bit better for multi-touch attribution. But the contrary, like multi-touch attribution is going to show that channel is great. But then if you think about, okay, well, what if your scoring model, you're making people sales ready just for downloading that report? Well, you're probably going to see that the conversion rate from sales ready to like meeting booked is probably really low, because people are like, well, not all of those people are sales ready. I know that's a great like resource for you guys, but you're actually like, you need to put a bit more filtering down there. So it's interesting because the multi-touch attribution is going to tell you a different story than like what your funnel metrics is going to do and for the story. And one of them is, to me, is a bit more actionable because it doesn't really have bias. It's just saying like, hey, that's not a great signal by itself to send to sales. You need to put like something else there, or maybe there's only a type of person that downloads that you then want to start a conversation around, whatever. But that to me, it like tells a lot about why if someone was just looking at the data and they didn't have that intel and use their noggin on the multi-touch side, they're just going to think, oh, it's amazing. And then they're like, oh, wait, but our conversion rate is bad. How do I figure out the two,
I would add too, like, I think that the reason you should do funnel metrics first is because it's going to benefit the entire business, not just marketing. Whereas multi-touch attribution is most beneficial to marketing because you're kind of seeing like what channels are most effective, what touch points within those channels are most effective. And it's important, yes, but the funnel metrics are going to see where in your entire sales process are things breaking down and why. Because like you might see, yes, I generated a ton of MQLs from this touch point and they're not this campaign and they're not converting. Is it because that's just a bad campaign? Or actually when I slice the data further, I'm seeing there's a bunch of records that got misrouted to somebody who doesn't follow up, on their records, and those are the ones not converting, but the ones that got routed properly are. So like it could be due to other reasons, and that's what you can do with some funnel diagnosis is see where those bottlenecks are, segment your funnel metrics by those key data points, and kind of figure out, well, what is it? Is it a bad campaign, or is it bad follow up? Is it something's wrong with routing? Is it we don't have a good process post meeting? What is it?
Yeah. And so I know we've got to wrap up in a minute, but there's a couple of things I want to touch on or get your opinions on before we wrap. So one of them is, I hear it all the time. I hear we have Visible or we have our multi-touch attribution tool. Why do I need to set up, this funnel tracking stuff? Like, can't I look at my conversion rates using Visible? Can I see my velocity using my multi-touch attribution? And it is. I feel like it's such a technical, difficult question to answer because there's a lot. It's like all around the nuances of the data and the data structure. And so, Alison, like, help me explain this. Like, help me explain, like, why can't you use like visible touchpoint data to show funnel conversion rates? Let's start there.
Yeah, I mean, you really need the date stamping for one, just like when a particular lead or contact reached each stage of that journey to be able to track those velocity and conversion rates. And you don't really get that with multi-touch. I know like some of the multi-touch platforms will have kind of pseudo funnel data where when something reaches a certain stage, they'll grab the latest touch point and you can kind of see that, but it's not really telling you, well, was that touch point what started the journey? Like, how long did it take them to get to that stage from the previous stage? And so that's why you really need like a record that tells you the date stamps and how quickly they made it through, and creates a new record when a new life cycle starts, so you can track the outcome of each of their funnel journeys. And multi-touch just doesn't, the data architecture isn't there for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I try and explain it in a similar way. It's like you're trying to, so with the funnel side, when you're trying to look at the journey through the funnel, you want that journey, that each individual journey through the funnel, so someone can become sales ready, working, meeting, but pipeline, etc. You want that on one record in one table, right? Like, you want to be able to look at one record in the database and go, this is when they got to this stage, this is when they got to this stage, then we got to this stage. As opposed to Visible, for each stage, well, it kind of works the other way around, actually. Each touch point is going to be there. There's going to try and relate that touch point to a stage and associate the touch point with when they meet the stage, get the most recent touch points, actually. So when you look at that person's journey, it's going to have all the records, which is the benefit of Visible, right? Because it's looking at the full buyer's journey and all the touch points. That's the whole point. But then it's, how do you report on that, right? Like, when you then say you've got 5 funnels, you want to be able to say, okay, how many of these hit that stage? I've got 5 records, so I count 5. And then if 3 of them have got to meeting book stage, I want to be able to say 3 of them have the date stamp for meeting book. But say of each of those 5 journeys across maybe 5 leads, say there's like 100 touch points. Trying to get that data into a reportable format. Maybe you could do it in a warehouse with all this crazy stuff and BI or whatever, but like in Salesforce, without all this crazy joining of all those touch points and trying to figure out how to assign the stage, it's going to be it's just impossible. The other thing with these multi-touch attribution tools, Visible will tell you generally miss about 10% of the touch points. So actually, about 4 years ago, I tried to use Visible data for one of our clients to just be able to calculate number of MQLs. But the problem is, when they looked at the amount of leads with an MQL date in a particular month, say it was 1,000. When you looked at the amount of visible touch points which were associated to an MQL stage in that month, it was like 900. And the reason why is because people, block cookies, they don't let the scripts run. There's people filling out forms in your website where the visible touch points don't end up getting created. So, and that is just because, not all of your digital touch points are going to get created. So you end up missing some of the MQL. So there's like a data loss perspective. Whereas when we talk about the funnel, we're talking about sales ready, and it has to be based on a known conversion, right? Because you have to be able to see that they did something associated to the person and say, this person is now sales ready. So you're not going to have missing data. So that's a couple of the things that I've noticed when we've tried to do this. Okay, so I know we're getting very, very close to time here. Anything else around trying to use multi-touch data to solve funnel, or on the opposite, trying to use funnel data to solve multi-touch, right? Any kind of final thoughts around that from either of you?
I think the only other thing to note around multi-touch, especially now in like 2024 and beyond. Well, one, I think if you're using like a model, like a W-shaped model and all that crap, like I just don't see how that's like
Tell us how
useful.
you really feel.
Just like a linear, I think just like, weight across every touch point, you're going to get better insight. Because I think what's better is to just show me like what's happening across more of our journeys. And to be fair, it's going to also be biased against like what are you deciding to do with your marketing. So I think for me, I think of like I said, the lift analysis is better. Like what like is there an actual like tie between which campaigns and channels have a higher propensity to impact pipeline revenue, especially if you like took that touch point away. The second thing is if I look, like you said, at the account level, if I'm looking at certain um, close one opportunities, say, I want to see like, is there a difference between how many touch points we had against like the ones that we close lost versus close one versus like our closed ones, and like the amount of time it took to close one. Is there a case where if we have 5 touch points and maybe there's even a certain touch point where we see that being having a higher propensity to then close at a certain rate, that to me is useful. And even sometimes just like the lack of what you see in the data is even more useful. Like if I'm not seeing a ton happening from marketing side, especially once a pipeline opportunity has been created, I'm like, okay, well, that's an opportunity for us to change that. And especially if you're seeing that pipeline stalls very quickly, once it hits that stage, that can give you a better intel into that. And like I said, like there's just so much, like you said, that is not perfectly tracked from the marketing journey. So I'm still a huge fan of like self-report attribution. How did you hear about us? Whether you have that on your form or you ask that even in the sales cycle, just being on the sales side or even with CS2, we have that on our form. And I think it's very telling. And sometimes it's not perfect. Like they might say Google, but then you talk to them, they're like, oh, I've been following your podcast for a long time. So I think marketers, if they want to actually then get some data that's useful, is just getting even deeper than multi-touch, like using self-report attribution, even doing customer interviews. Once someone closed ones, like ask them, what do they like about the sales process? What are some of the things that help them with making their decision? Like actually like go deeper with your customers and ask them. And that's telling too. Like use in short, like you need to use your noggin, basically. Like, and in some ways there's common sense. Like there's some things that are just not going to be tracked. And if we're only doing things that we can track, it's shitty marketing.
Yeah, and that's a great way to wrap it up. Our philosophy here at CS2 is that all of these forms of attribution have their place, right? We're not advocates of just one over the other. We think there's kind of an order, like a stepping stone, to maybe try and mature into each one, but they all have their own benefits. And I think the clearest, the most important thing that we're trying to get across here is that they're different and they solve different problems, they answer different questions, they have different setup, they have different data structures and data model. And the more people can understand the differences between the two and stop conflating them, I think this whole attribution debate, like I kind of began at the beginning of the podcast, like it's been the spiciest kind of topic in our line of work for probably the last 5 to 10 years. But because of just so many, how nuanced it is, and lots of misunderstanding and myths and confusion and people advocating for one over the other. But let's just kind of, I think we're going to keep on trying to push out this message of trying to make clear distinctions between the two, and hopefully it helps. So if you like this episode, let us know. Give us a like or subscribe. I think I've mentioned this on a few of our previous podcasts, that we're very busy over on the YouTube side. So go check out our videos there and let us know if you have feedback. Definitely open to hearing what everyone thinks, particularly on this topic. So thank you, Chrissy. Thank you, Alison, for joining. And I'm sure we'll bring Alison on again to talk about all things attribution, data reporting, and a load of other things. So thank you both, and see everyone in the next one.
Thanks.
Thank you.